this is Reverend Ken Wilcox at the Center for Spiritual Living here in beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. I've got an amazing story to share with you today, one that's going to inspire you and give you faith in humanity. It's about a 25-year-old guy who really was a special guy. His name is Ila Fahal. He came from northern Israel, from the Galilee section. He came from a very large family, and they were Druze, neither Christian, Islamic, or Jewish. It was a special sect that had spun off from Islam almost 700 years ago. And it just proves to us that the world is a little bit more complicated place than sometimes we want to think. Anyway, he came from a large family, very loving, very supportive. He was a great guy. The nickname for him was Captain because he was strong, he was athletic, but he also wanted to make sure that everyone around him was included and cared for, so he was a beloved person. When he became a young man, because he was in the sect that he was required to do military service in the Israeli military. On one of his assignments, his patrol was asked to burst through a family home and to search for something. And when they did, he noticed that a little 2-year-old girl had gone in a corner and she was shaking in fear, trembling and crying. He dropped his weapons and he gave her comfort. The next morning, he went to his officers and told them, "I won't be doing this again." After he got out of his military service, he decided to go into sports medicine. Many of his family members were doctors or in the health industry, and he thought this would be a nice way to mesh his two interests. Before he could get started with medical school, he developed blinding headaches. At first, they thought it was a sinus infection, but after a week or two antibiotics and no effect, they knew they needed to get him to a hospital. In the hospital, they discovered a tumor in one of his sinus cavities. Now, the doctors, thinking that he was a young, healthy guy, they thought they could give him a really strong dose of chemo, and maybe it would knock it out of his system. It in fact did. The tumor shrunk away to not be noticeable. Once he was out of the hospital, he decided to celebrate by taking a trip to Europe with one of his cousins. But before they could head out to Europe, the tumor had come back. This time, the doctor says there's nothing we can do. And in fact, they gave his parents the number for hospice. One nurse did some research and she says, wait a minute. She says, there's a doctor in Pittsburgh who's doing research on this particular cancer. Get in touch with him and see if there's something they can do. The doctor was in Pittsburgh in the United States. The family contacted him and he said yes, he thought he could help Eihab. The family did their research and realized it would be very, very expensive to get Eihab there, and that Israeli healthcare system wouldn't be able to contribute. So his father sold a tract of land, he sold the family car, but still, that wasn't enough. One of Eihhab's sisters put it on Facebook about her brother, and soon the contributions were pouring in, not just from their community, but from the local Christian communities and the Jewish communities. And so the whole family set out to Pittsburgh to get a healing for Eihab. Now, what they didn't know about the neighborhood or community they were going to in Pittsburgh, it had been a victim of violence itself just recently. This is where the Tree of Life shooting happened at their synagogue, where a gunman broke in during religious service and murdered 11 people. In this tight group-knit community, many people had relatives or friends who were murdered there. And if they didn't know of someone who was murdered, many of them heard the gunshots from the temple. To pull the community together, people began to circulate a saying and a logo, and the saying was "Stronger than hate," stronger than hate. And soon this logo began to appear in buttons and bumper stickers in people's windows and store windows. It helped this community know that they were stronger than the hate that had come against them. When Ila and his family showed up, they didn't have a place to live. A social worker at the hospital, she heard of a family that had a large apartment over a garage, and so she reached out to them. They were the Bernsteins. And they said, well, we've never used this apartment before, but they're welcome to it. Eihab and his family moved in, and before even the first weekend, the young kids of the Falahs and the Bernsteins were interacting. Soon the teens were, and then the parents were. When the Bernsteins met Eihab's parents, they told them, we're a family now. You can't live above our garage. You have to come and you have to stay with us in our house. We are one family now. Soon the whole community heard about Eihab and his family, and they began helping out in as many ways as they could, helping them get him back and forth to the hospital, being there when the doctors came in to explain Eihab's condition and trying to help in the translation. They even, a group of them even made sure that Eihab's mom had the particular spices that she needed to cook Eihab's favorite special food while he was getting chemo. He received one round of chemo, but it didn't seem to help much. And then there was the experimental drug that was due to be given him. And he received that as well. But nothing seemed to work. Finally, he was on a respirator. The doctors assured his family that there was nothing else they could do for him. And so the family released him back to spirit. Before they went back home to Israel, the community wanted to honor Eihab and his family. And so they held a service for him at a Jewish funeral home. The home was packed with people who had interacted with the family and had helped the family. And when Eihab's sister and mom came into the auditorium, they had embroidered on their skirts the Strongerthanhate logo that had been used to help bring the community closer together. And when the Jewish people saw this sign of compassion and unity, they say that the whole congregation just wept openly. They had become one family. And of course, the big conversation is how they were able, in their midst of their suffering, to come together. You know, some of us have a misguided idea that we want to wait around until everything's good in our lives before we can help out. But that's not the way life is. Christ showed this example on the cross. There, crucified, next to him, the thief cried out in pain. And Jesus told him, don't worry, this day, I will be with you in paradise. I know, we have so much turmoil going on in our world right now. And it's a temptation to want to argue with the people who are, you know, at our school boards or in the streets or arguing with nurses and doctors. But you know what? Hate can never overcome hate. The only thing that will overcome hate is more love. And I think that's what Eihab and his family and the Jewish community in Pittsburgh has showed us. That we can rise above all the turmoil and anger we see around us with love. And that by stepping up and being the person Spirit has called us to be that conduit of God's possibilities and love here, now, right as we are, we can help bring about a whole new heaven and a whole new earth full of God's love and God's compassion. This is the truth in your life today. It's the truth in mine, and so it is.